Landscape photography is all about capturing the right moment. So when that moment comes, you don't want to be making a mistake that could possibly cost you the shot of a lifetime. So in this video, I'm going to be going through the 8 most common photography mistakes for landscape photographers, plus how to fix those. Hey, what's up guys? My name is David Johnston, and in this channel we talk about mistakes, but also tools and how to fix them and tips on how to take the shots of a lifetime. And we provide you with those tips and tools to help you level up the success and love for your photography. So if you're into that, go ahead and hit the subscribe button right now. There are a lot of mistakes you can make in landscape photography for sure, and some of them you can correct in whatever editing software that you like to use later on after the fact. But there are several, 8 to be exact, that you actually can't correct. And number 1 of that is either lack of stability or any camera shake that's going on in your camera. Especially if you're using something like a long exposure with your camera, so that can be anything longer than 1/60th of a second is about what I would say a long exposure is. But any camera shake that happens can show up in those images, and those faster shutter speeds, like anything from 1/10th of a second to about 1/50th of a second, those can have slight camera shake that can make the sharp edges of your objects and subjects within your photo a little bit shaky. And you don't want that to happen because it looks like you got the photo a little bit blurry. This can happen on those edges of the days where sunrise or sunset, when it's still a little bit dark and you're using those long exposures, or for moving water shots where you're either flattening out or smoothing out the surface of a lake, or you're lengthening your exposure to smooth out a rushing river. So you want to be sure you're using a sturdy tripod, that your camera keeps completely still in rushing waters or in high winds or anything like that. You could also use something like a cable release that just plugs into the side of your camera, and then this button right here acts as a shutter. You can actually get these really cheap on Amazon for like $9, and they make some really good universal ones that work with a lot of different cameras. And whatever camera you use, you're gonna have one of these available to you for a really cheap cost. They also go up to a higher cost if you wanna spend money on something like a wireless cable release. Now, what I like to do with my camera, since I don't like to take a lot of extra gear around with me and have it plugged in, and I always say if I'm using more gear, what happens is there's more of a chance that I'll make a mistake or forget to do something with that extra piece of gear. So what I like to do is just set my camera to a 2-second timer, and I hit the shutter and the camera goes click, click, takes the photo, and I know to be completely still when that's happening. So you can fix that in a lot of different ways, whether it be cable release or a camera timer, but definitely the non-negotiable here is you have to get a tripod for any landscape photography. The second most common mistake that a lot of photographers make is not having a level horizon line. The horizon line is where the sky meets the earth, and that could be on mountains, that could be just on a straight plane, maybe where the water of the ocean or the lake meets the sky. Your horizon line should be really straight, and you may argue, okay, that can be fixed in post-processing. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that you can adjust the crop and move it slightly, but every movement you make zooms in a little bit on that crop and removes certain parts of the image out of that crop. So what you're doing is, if you have a perfect composition, you have the rocks in the foreground exactly where you want them to be, the trees, everything's in a perfect placement. If you get that horizon line off and you adjust it, that's going to zoom in and cut out parts of that perfect composition that you have. And a composition is just the arrangement of the subjects within your frame to make a cohesive or visually pleasing photograph. So when you are working on this, one way to fix that and be sure or foolproof this is to just When you're in the field, zoom out a little bit to add a little bit more extra room on the edges of your composition so that if you do make a mistake with your horizon line, you can always just crop that in and be sure that you have that extra wiggle room on the sides of your frame. Now, a lot of cameras too have a display option with a level on it. And if you use that, you can actually line up your camera level compared to the ground that you're standing on. Or if you still want to adjust it a little bit more, what I like to do is actually bring up the display mode on the back of my camera. That is the rule of thirds grid that just has lines going across your frame on the back of your LCD screen on your camera. It separates out those segments of your photo, but I like to use those straight lines to line up my horizon line. Not necessarily place items within my photo, but use those lines as their own level. So the horizon line is exactly on one of those lines and I know that it's straight. Thirdly, you don't want to get stuck shooting one way or the other. And a lot of times people get stuck shooting just in landscape view. So just from lengthwise or widthwise long ways like this. Some of the most creative photographs that you can actually get is in portrait view, which is up and down like this. If you really focus on going to a location and taking a photo with, yes, one landscape, but then say, I wonder what could work portrait view here, and you flip your camera up on its side and you take one lengthwise. One of the best things you can do with this is using something like a wide angle lens to really stretch the foreground out, because what a wide angle lens does is it has more room on the top and the bottom. Visually, it doesn't actually have more room, but visually it looks like that area of the photo is stretched a little bit more. So it has this really cool impact, and that works really well when you shoot in portrait. So always go to a location knowing you're gonna try a landscape or a wide shot and a portrait shot or a tall shot whenever you're there. Fourth, a common mistake you can make is completely forgetting about the aperture that you're using. And the aperture is the opening inside of the lens that you're using to allow that amount of light to get in. But it also controls how much depth of field that you have, or focus depth into the frame that you're shooting that you have in your scene. So if you have something like f2, that's depth is going to be really shallow depending on where you're focusing in the frame. If you're going to something like f16, pretty much everything within view is going to be within focus. One of the things I like to do is stay within f14 to f16 to be sure that I don't have an aperture that I'm getting a really shallow depth of field in. Now, you may be saying, well, what about certain situations where you're too close to the foreground, which is just the bottom area of your frame, and the background or the mountains in the background or something like that are really, really far away. In those situations, what I'll do is something called focus stacking. And with focus stacking, I'll focus one shot at like f11, f14 to the foreground item, the bottom of the frame, and then I'll take another photo focusing to the mountain or the background in the back of the frame. Then in post-processing or in Photoshop, whatever you use to edit your photos, if this is available in that, I will blend those two photos together and have a very sharp image. If you're confused about that or you want to know how to do it, you can click or tap the card showing up on your screen right now. Number 5 is a big one, and it's shooting in the automatic settings in your camera. I want to encourage you to shoot in manual everything on your camera because it gives you full control over what you're doing to create the photo that you're imagining in your head. What happens when you allow your camera to choose something in an automatic setting is it can choose something that can result in a lot of image noise in your photo, which is just kind of pixelated areas of the dark sections of your image. Or it can do something like choose a really shallow depth of field, or a shutter speed that you don't want, a long exposure versus a short exposure. So you're giving up some of these features that you could control on your own. What I want to do for you is I have a manual mode challenge for you that's in 72 hours. I'll teach you to use manual mode via email. I'll go ahead and include that in the pinned comment below if you want to enter that. That's completely free, and you'll get a set of emails for 3 days that's going to teach you to use manual mode and completely master your camera. So I have that for you in the pinned comment. Creatively, a mistake that you can make is standing next to other photographers. Look, there are all these locations that we can go to that are very popular and very famous. But what happens when you're standing next to other photographers is you're just taking the exact same photograph that they are taking. And while it can be fun to see these iconic locations and go and visit them and take your own photo of them, you come back and you kind of see those and you're like, I was there, it was fun. But when you take a photo that you work on, that you kind of get away from the main shot where everybody else is standing, sometimes you can come away with some really prized photos that you can be really proud of. And that's the joy of photography, is creating something out of the unnormal or the unnatural. So yeah, you can take that iconic shot. I would definitely encourage you to do that because you went to a location because you had seen that photo somewhere and it made you want to visit that place. What I would also encourage you to do is, after you take that shot, say, what else is there? And think to yourself, what else do I see? What could be a possibility here? And just go through the techniques that you already know in your bag of tricks, and I know you're going to create something really special. Composition is major for your landscape photography. It's the arrangement of subjects within your frame that creates a cohesive image or photograph. And negative space is areas of solid colors or just blank blue sky, and including those, too much of those, can result in a boring photo. And really, including too much negative space without intent can be unnatural or kind of weird to the viewer, because what happens in a composition, the goal is to lead your viewer strategically from place to place within the scene. Now, if you're confused about that, you want to know more, I have a complete course about landscape photography called Ignite Your Composition. It's part of my Landscape Photography University course. That's in the video description here, but I digress. What I want to give you for this video is excluding too much negative space can be a great thing. So if you're in a location with clear blue skies and you're kind of like, kind of boring skies, a solid shot here. This happens a lot in desert photography, actually. What I want you to do is look at the ground. Don't even worry about the horizon line or the clear blue skies. Look straight down and find some designs in the landscape that you can frame up and shoot. There's always something that you can create. It doesn't always have to be a photo with the land and the sky. Really think differently when you're in a situation where you're using too much negative space that can result in a boring photo. Every photo is a story, and one of the biggest mistakes is not including a main character in your story. For photography, it's your main subject. So people want to know, what is the main idea, main theme, main subject of this story that you're telling me through a photo? And if you're kind of confused about what that means, is it everything kind of has to point to that main character, that main subject of your photo. So what you don't want to do with a main subject is have any intersecting lines over it. It doesn't need to be covered up by grasses or rocks or anything like that. It needs to be really prominently featured within the scene that you're photographing. If you want more videos that are going to help you out, here's a playlist that I think is really going to be beneficial to your photography. And also here's another video that I think you're going to like.